This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is May 1st, 2025.
I'm Scott Lundebaum.
I'm Ian Bushfield. Happy International Workers' Day, which it is. When I lived in London, the office I worked at was in Clerkenwell Green, and it's a nice little square there, and our office was actually above where Karl Marx used to have his printing press. And so the unions would gather on May 1st with their drums and their big, British banners and start their May Day festivities there. And it was an energy that they then marched away. Those weren't productive work days, but it's a good energy. So anyway, we don't really celebrate May Day to that effect in Canada, but other places do. We're not here to talk about that, though. We're here to talk about politics in Canada. So support the show, patreon.com/politicos. We'll get into it in a second, of course. I do want to start by also marking the Lapu-Lapu tragedy this past weekend, where I think everyone knows the story now. The person drove their car through the festival and killed at least 11 people. Incredibly tragic. Filipino BC has launched a fundraiser in participation with United Way. So if you go to the link in our bio, just filipinobc.com.
Show notes, I believe you mean.
Yeah, show notes. I'm so used to Twitter stuff or Blue Sky, TikTok, and all of that. filipinobc.com to chip in some money to support the organization that put on Lapu-Lapu Festival, as well as the families of the survivors and the victims of the event. Our hearts go out to everyone affected by it.
Yeah, just real tragedy.
Let's jump into the election results. It was a few days ago now, so everyone probably knows the highlights, with the updated one seat that was recounted today to split from Liberal to Bloc, but overall things are still the same. A Liberal minority government, as I think I predicted on our New Year's episode.
Yeah, good call on that one. That was looking a little less likely at that time.
I was feeling like it was going to be a Liberal majority 3 days ago, or 4 days ago.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's whether or not the party should be happy about this really depends if they're entering their expectations a week ago or 6 months ago. The NDP should just be disappointed no matter what, but all the other parties, whether or not that was a good outcome or a bad outcome really depends.
It was also bad for the Greens, let's be fair.
Did anyone have good expectations for the Greens? I mean, maybe Mike Morris might have held on to his seat, but that was going to be the high watermark, was 2 seats rather than 1.
Yeah. Paul Manley was ambitious in Nanaimo, but let's
never had a chance.
Start at the top. Yeah, Liberals 168, 43.7%, Conservatives 144 seats, 41.3% of the popular vote, combined to have the highest Liberal Conservative popular vote in 100 years. I haven't 100% verified that, but feels right. Highest percentage for the Liberals since, or any majority since 1980 when Brian Mulroney scored it, and the Conservatives since best they've done since 84, I think.
80 was a Trudeau Senior victory. It was 84 where the Brian Mulroney Conservatives pulled out not just a plurality, but an actual majority in the popular vote. One of the 2 elections in the post-war period when that happened. 88, though, was the one that the Conservatives this time managed to beat. So, the Conservatives, even though they didn't win this election, still got a higher percentage of the popular vote than any party managed in my lifetime, with the exceptions of the Liberals this time.
How bitter this result was for Pierre Poilievre. Obviously, also for more reasons that we'll get into once we talk on specific seats, but such a weird election. I've talked to a couple people, especially ones who door knocked, and issues didn't matter. It was just we're all just going to vote, quote unquote, strategically, which ended up just all meaning liberal, or you were voting for change. Like, the way I see it is there were two questions on the ballot. One was, do you want to vote against Donald Trump? Vote liberal. Or do you want to vote against Trudeau and the Liberals? Vote conservative. That was it.
It really was there were really two ballot questions, and whether it was a primary Trump one or a primary change really depended on how you voted on it, because there was very little room in between. The Conservatives, I think, did a pretty solid job of locking up all the change votes, and if only Trump hadn't been in, that change vote would have been even bigger. But as it sits now, they I think very solidly campaigned on and captured the change vote, but just turns out not to be the only thing that was being asked at the time.
I don't think they were going to surpass 41%. Like, given the dislike on the center left of the political spectrum in this country, which is about 45 to 60% of the country, they weren't going to vote for Pierre Poilievre, who every other time is, every other press conference is talking about the World Economic Forum, wokeism, or, another aspect of language that just sounds a little too reactionary for them.
I'm not sure about that, because this was not the high watermark in the polls for them at 41.3%. They were getting 45, 46, I think, in one poll. Maybe 47. The average, I don't think, ever really got much more beyond 45, but the high end range of the polls were inching close to an outright majority of the vote. They lost some ground, but it was not clear that they would not have been able to get a little higher if there hadn't been some people who left the Conservative coalition. But yeah, they did a good job of holding their vote together for the most part. They only slipped a couple percentage from their high watermark.
And I think that came down to the campaigning, as people saw or didn't see Conservatives, because Pierre Poilievre avoided a lot of media and had his campaign. Like, every election, it seems like Conservatives don't show up to local town halls. I don't know if it was worse this year than usual, but I think it's definitely a trend.
It's been a couple elections now. I think it actually started probably in the Harper years, where the strategist basically decided that nobody really changes their mind at these town halls. The people who show up are almost always the high engagement people who have probably made up their mind before they go to that, and that having the candidate do other things to contact voters, door knock, phone calls, all that stuff, yields more of a result for the campaign.
And then they also had their they all had late platform releases, which was its own frustration and
so frustrating. Yeah, this is the first election I voted without seeing any platforms, which is not what I. Yeah, I'm one of the rare people that actually reads these things and weighs that as part of my decision making, and it was annoying not to have any of them when I needed to mail my ballot in.
And so it was an interesting election night as well, right? Because we saw a lot of different regional trends. The Conservatives were up in Ontario. I think they were down in Quebec a little bit. They were up in BC, kind of like held steady in Alberta, Saskatchewan. It's hard to break 65% of the vote in those two provinces.
Yeah, if anything, they seem to have solved a bunch of their vote efficiency challenges in this and ended up with a much more efficient vote than they have historically, just because those other provinces broke more for them and they kept the Saskatchewan, Alberta vote roughly where it was.
Still not as efficient as the Liberals, though. Every good thing the Conservatives had for this election but it wasn't good enough, and the Liberals just had it a little better. And the Liberals built their majority on Quebec, various seats in Toronto, BC, Atlantic Canada, and just a spattering of a few more everywhere else. 2 in the north kind of thing.
Yeah, some unusual pickups. Beat Nikki Ashton in the northern
Manitoba
riding. Bunch of those.
Northern Saskatchewan voted 65% Liberal.
Yeah, I was looking up that one earlier. It really looks like, based off of the Wikipedia's estimate on what the 2021 vote redistributed in the new boundaries was, that was less the Norths won wildly than that the new boundaries were just much more favorable ground for the Liberals in that one. They would have picked that one up in 2021 by a very healthy margin if it had the new boundaries in it.
Well, it never really made sense that Saskatchewan, and Alberta this happened too, would vote 60 to 65% conservative, but not give a single and that's like first past the post. But it's nice to see a few opposition MPs, or I guess in this case government, a few non-conservative MPs from Alberta and Saskatchewan. In this case, we also got two Liberals and an New Democrat from Alberta.
Yeah, basically one Liberal in each of the major cities. The Calgary seat ended up being Calgary Confederation, which is where other politics podcaster Tori Horgan from The Strategist was running. So, he's probably a shoo-in for cabinet at this point, just to get that Alberta representation, which, happy for him. Little disappointed because I am a fan of that podcast. It's going to suffer for his absence, because I don't think he's going to do the Stephen Carter thing of just podcasting through it all.
Well, we're talking surprise ridings. Obviously, the biggest one in the country was Carleton, the riding that's not technically outside the city of Ottawa, other than the fact when you look at a map, it feels like it shouldn't be City of Ottawa.
Well, that's because City of Ottawa is weird and is just gigantic. It covers a huge amount of the urban area. Like, it feels like it goes halfway to North Bay. It's not quite, but you're driving a long way before you're technically outside of Ottawa.
Anyway, Carleton typically has voter turnouts of the high 70s or 80%. I think it was about 81% in the highest turnout this election. Pierre Poilievre has held it for 20 odd years. I think 2004 was his first election victory there.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Kind of like straight out of college, he went and became an MP and has been there since. Usually doing pretty well, like high 40s, low 50s, fairly safe. No one was like, they're going to lose Carleton, until those like stories leaked in the last few days before the election, like Pierre Poilievre is going to campaign in his own riding or have a final rally in his own riding, and they're redirecting resources, and they're like, we just want to make sure we're focused everywhere. And it kind of felt like maybe Doug Ford's team was throwing more shade, but Bruce Vanjoy of the Liberals worked his ass off and won by 5%.
Well, I think it's both. There were definitely a few leaks in the Ontario PCs about their polling in Carleton. Interestingly, on that one, almost a mirror of the national results, there was actually Pierre Poilievre's best raw vote total since 2011. He posted, better results this time than the last several elections. Turned out just wasn't enough, though.
Yeah.
Because, Bruce Vanjoy managed to take the seat. Amusingly, there's he posted like a year ago or something that he was going to defeat Pierre Poilievre. And props to him for calling the shot on that one when the Conservatives were up 20 points.
So naturally, a bunch of articles have flown around being like, does this mean he has to resign? Does this mean he can't live at Stornoway? And I thought, so technically he's still obviously leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. He's not technically leader of the official opposition in the House of Commons because he's not in the House of Commons. And because he doesn't have that title, technically he can't live in Stornoway. And it felt like a lot of Blue Sky Libs were just trying to make that a thing. Press Progress did call the National Capital Commission, and they're like, yeah, technically he can't live there. So It's unclear if he's now homeless. He might have to go live with his tenant, Michael Cooper, who I believe was reelected. I'm pretty confident was reelected.
He was reelected.
I say without looking because he comes from Alberta, I'm pretty sure.
I saw the riding results on Monday for that riding. On the Stornoway thing, yes, it does seem a little silly if he's going to do the thing that L leaders do when they don't have a seat of have a MP in a safe seat step down, let him run in a by-election so he can get back in. It's just a lot of moving that I'm gotta guess is being paid for by the taxpayer just to move him out and back in over a course of a couple months.
Yeah, like, I don't like him on a personal level, but I'm not so petty that I think that's necessary. I think the Capital Commission should grant some grace and be like, provided he's willing to stand for a seat somewhere, we'll hold off evicting him until we see if he wins that. The first rumor we saw come out a couple places was that he would try to run in Edmonton Griesbeck, which is just won by Kerry Diot, who was a former MP there, but had lost in 2021 to the NDP's Blake Desjardins, who's actually quite popular there. And it was a rather tight race, so it would seem really weird for him not to pick.
There's about a 10-point gap this time, but yeah, I would not take that one as a sure thing, particularly if the Liberals stay home on this one. And, that's the other thing is sometimes parties will observe a occasional tradition of not running someone against a leader when they're in a by-election on that. So it would be
the Liberals and Conservatives being most common. I don't think the NDP has ever observed that.
Yeah, and they also have not benefited from that. I don't think anyone's ever not run against an NDP leader on that. But yeah, it would be easy for the Liberals to look magnanimous by saying we're not running someone in that riding and let everything coalesce around that. On the other hand, keeping the NDP down isn't without its own benefits if you're the Liberals, so bit of a strategy call on that one.
The MP, Kerry Diot, has said he's not planning to step down, but, I mean, things can change. There's a lot of safer seats that make more sense. North Okanagan, where there's an older MP. The caucus is actually relatively young. I was trying to go through and see who was the oldest, and there's some people in their mid-late 60s, like Kathy Wagantall and Candice Malcolm, I believe.
But yeah, overall, the Conservative caucus is fairly young.
Yeah. They get them right out of campus conservative clubs. But let's keep going through some of the other interesting ridings. Also in Ontario, Kitchener Centre's quite notable. That was where the second Green MP, Mike Morris, was. He suffered, like many did, from vote splitting in a way. That riding went Conservative with 34%. Mike Morris was at 33%. I think only a few hundred votes back, 400 votes in the end. Liberals getting about 29%, the NDP 2%, and 1,100 votes. So real disappointing night for the Greens, considering the caucus got cut in half, let alone all of the votes went away otherwise. Southern Ontario had a lot of other ridings.
Yeah, Ontario in general was kind of interesting. Like, that is where the Liberals lost their majority. It really is just entirely red and blue there. The NDP were pretty much a non-entity in the province, got no seats. And interestingly, there are quite a few kind of blue-orange ridings, and in a lot of the places outside of the city of Toronto and Ottawa, the Conservative the NDP vote drop on there did not turn into a bunch of votes for the Liberals. The Liberal vote rise was less than the NDP drop, so there's an indication there that the Conservatives in the more rural ridings benefited from the NDP's collapse more than the Liberals did, which, is part of a long-term trend where the NDP have had trouble holding on to the blue-collar portion of their base.
Yeah, it's hard to tell how much was soft Liberals went to Conservatives and then NDP went to Liberals, or just NDP went to Conservatives. Looking across Ontario, like, they got 17% in Davenport. Matthew Green got 29% in Hamilton, but was defeated. There's a few with 10%. In London, they got one with 27%. And Ottawa Centre, Joel Harden got 19.5%. But, like, most of their results across the province were bad. I mean, that's true across the country, but, like, Ontario, I did go back. They didn't have seats in Ontario in the 90s, so this isn't the first time it's happened to the NDP, but, like, to just kind of talk about the NDP for a second, right? 7 seats across the country, 3 in BC, and then, 1 in Alberta, 1 in Manitoba, 1 in Quebec, and 1 in the North. Their caucus fits in a minivan now, 6.3% across the country, just 5,000 votes more than the Bloc.
Yeah, barely any seats where they even finished second in. Jagmeet Singh, who we've not talked about yet, came in third in his riding, had a decisive defeat on that one.
His riding did get redrawn heavily, but it did seem like he still had a path. But yeah,
I mean, the neighboring ridings, the NDP got 9.8%. Oh, Peter Julian was his own thing there. North of that's Burnaby North Seymour, where Terry Beach has a strong presence. Liberal. Yeah, and that one, the NDP got 6.4. Jagmeet Singh actually outperformed the NDP candidates in the adjacent Burnaby ridings.
Yeah. Rough night. Like, they kept Alexandre Boularice, Leah Gazan, Laurie Idlett, Heather McPherson in Alberta, Gord Johns, Jenny Kwan, and Don Davies. And, like, I can name them all.
Yeah.
I couldn't name their whole caucus before.
Don Davies barely held on.
Which is wild.
Yeah, 300 votes. Like, disappointingly was able to squeeze out a victory on that one. But for a long time, it looked like he was going to lose the riding.
You say that, and I saw a lot of Yimbys hoping he would lose because of his past statements on housing. But, like, just think, if he was unemployed, he might consider running for Vancouver mayor. And that's where he would actually have some influence on housing, rather than being the fourth party's health critic, where he's actually done a lot of good work.
Yeah, he's also championed a bunch of alternative medicine stuff and made it easier.
Not recently, I think. But
that's still in his record on that. But yeah, no, I've had a pretty strong dislike of him ever since he decided to use his position as an MP to try and rally opposition to needed mixed income rental housing in his riding, and was apparently in large part motivated by bitterness over the Vancouver City Hall denying him a building permit to expand his deck. Like,
the NDP love their decks, Scott. We know this in this province. Let's keep going through some of the results then. Let's go through some of the other interesting and notable ridings. We were both watching Abbotsford South Langley, where independent Mike DeYoung was trying to challenge the Conservatives and everyone else there. And, the safe bet always in Canadian politics is to bet against independents, and neither of us wanted to, but we should have, because he came in third. Quite a weak result, 17%.
Yeah, I thought it slipped a little bit from the preliminary results.
Yeah, less than 10,000 votes.
Yeah, he was, I think on election night, was sitting at kind of 19 on there, but that must have slipped a bit as the some of the advanced and mail-ins came in. But yeah, I was kind of hoping at the very least he would, if not be able to win, which, like I said, is pretty unlikely, be able to at least cost the Conservatives the seat over the nomination shenanigans they pulled on that one.
No, the kid who just came out of like poli-sci or whatever, Sukhman Gill, is the new MP there. So, yeah, so congrats.
Once again, yeah, really gotta learn the lesson that independents really just have no shot here on that. And, if there is a case for an independent, it would be someone like Mike Dionne, who, law and history and politics, served that area as an elected representative for 30 years, about thereabouts. Strong community ties, high name recognition, and even then couldn't cross 20%.
Yeah. A few of the other ones I want to talk about around BC, because, we could spend a while going through the country, but I think we should focus on BC. Kelowna went back to the Liberals with former MP Stephen Fuhr taking it again, just narrowly ahead of Tracy Gray, the incumbent. The NDP lost South Okanagan, like many others, where they went from first to third, dropping to 16% there. And that's a story that we see elsewhere, right? When I look around my own neighborhood, Port Moody and New Westminster, we already mentioned Peter Julian, the NDP lost them both. In Port Moody, Coquitlam, Benita Zarrillo was the incumbent, and there was a lot of back and forth between her and former Port Moody, I believe, City Councillor Zoe Royer, who ran for the Liberals, over who's the strategic vote, with Benita releasing campaign material about, here's how I performed in the last election, and Zoe filing an Elections Canada complaint that was misinformation. Classy shit.
I mean, it is kind of bullshit, and this is not the first time I've seen an NDP riding level campaign use the past election results as, we just need X number more votes to win this time.
I've seen Liberals do it. I've seen the Greens were doing it in Nanaimo, and we'll get there in a second.
Yeah, but it's something I just pulled out once or twice. It's hardly the sort of thing to file an elections complaint over.
Yeah,
that's some petty bullshit right there.
Anyway, Zoe won with conservative NIMBY Paul Lambert coming in second at 40%. So
yeah, and the incumbent less than 10%, I believe.
15% in the end, just under 10,000 votes. And similar, well, not quite the same, but in New Westminster, Burnaby, Mallardville, Peter Julian lost to Liberal Jake Sawatsky, who also looks like a child in his photos. I'm sorry, a lot of I like that young people get elected, but it's weird when young people defeat incumbents. But good for them. Jake got 35% to Peter Julian's 31.6. Peter actually almost came in third, just narrowly by 200 votes, edging out the Conservative candidate there. So a lot of these places where the NDP dropped or went from first to second or third, and Liberals often came from third to first. Victoria and Saanich, or Victoria and Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke both flipped to the Liberals. In Esquimalt, the NDP dropped to third as an incumbent. Laurel Collins held on at second in Victoria, but at 25% to the Liberals' 54%. Saanich Gulf Islands, the one Green seat, Elizabeth May held on with 39%, and now she wants to be speaker. So, well, she said she'd be open to it.
Of course,
she's always said that. As we go kind of across the southern Vancouver Island, lots of seats flipped. Cowichan, Malahat, Langford was an NDP seat, is now a Conservative seat. That kind of went three ways, with Conservatives getting 37%, the Liberals getting 28%. Nanaimo was the four-way race, except it was kind of between the NDP and Greens for the last three elections, with the NDP holding it, and then Paul Manley winning it in 2019, and then the NDP winning it in 2021. They both got about 18% this time. The Liberals got 28%, and the Conservative won it with 35%. So just a mess of first past the post there. Congrats, Nanaimo. The NDP held on to the Mid-Island, Courtenay Alberni at 40%. Gord Johns posting like I guess not the best result for the NDP in the province, because the Vancouver East,
which was also a way tighter race than it has been historically.
43% though to 35.
To 35. But last time there was an 18,000 point or 18,000 vote gap there, and it's less than 5,000 now. It was actually one where the Liberals had an outside shot, but it was looking competitive for a decent chunk of the election.
Yeah, the NDP also dropped on North Island Powell River to 33%, with Aaron Gunn winning it with 38.8%, despite a lot of material targeting Gunn specifically for the many things he has said in the past, from, hating on trans people, to saying residential schools weren't a genocide, to praising Vladimir Putin. He's going to Ottawa. He might be a cabinet minister. Skeena Bulkley Valley was also won by the Conservatives. Ellis Ross 47% to NDP Taylor Bacharach's 39%. That's Nathan Cullen's old riding, where he usually did pretty well.
Yeah, and the NDP and Taylor Bacharach had held in the last parliament. But I think Ellis Ross is going to be an interesting voice to be in Ottawa, so kind of happy he won that.
It'll be interesting for sure. So those were the kind of things I was looking around. The South Island was such an NDP stronghold that just collapsed for the Liberals.
Well, East Vancouver is basically the only thing approaching an NDP stronghold at this point.
Yeah. None of the seats they won are even particularly strong. Edmonton Strathcona was 47% for Heather McPherson. It's one place where that was Rachel Notley's riding provincially overlaps that with the University of Alberta. So they've been building that for years. Leah Gazan in Winnipeg Centre, 39.5%. Even that's not a strong victory. And their one Montreal seat, Rosemont Le Petit Patrie, for Alexandra Boulerice was 41%. So they have a caucus where local MPs who've worked their ass off have managed to hold on. But there were a lot more that I would have expected to do better than that, just on their own local profile. But either vote splitting or just everyone just collapsed and their base went to the Liberals, or kind of split between Liberals and Cons and just disappeared. I know
such a non-entity in this election.
My local NDP campaign was kind of a non-existent thing. They had some door knockers, but signs weren't getting delivered. I know the candidate told me that a lot of the focus was going to be to put resources into incumbent ridings, but it seems like that didn't even work that well.
Well, that may have been the extent of the resources they could muster.
Yeah, but probably just didn't have any money, so...
Yeah, the NDP weren't in great financial shape, but and also they've been largely reduced to an irrelevant. I can't think of kind of any time in the election the NDP even broke through enough to get much in the way of a headline for a day or so. They were always the also mentioned on paragraph 8 of whatever story was written.
Yeah, I have leftists who are I can't name what the NDP ran on, and I was like, oof. I know because I was looking for it. I went actively looking for what all the parties were running on.
If we were digging stuff up for the podcast, I would have just had no idea what the NDP were doing. And
they suffered one of the things that I've heard, we heard a lot of the rumors out of the federal conservative campaign that they didn't know how to pivot to this Trump question. And it seems like the NDP had that same thing. I think I heard some stories where they're we didn't think tariffs would be such a big deal.
How do you
They're bad at their job, Scott.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Also the NDP have a deep protectionist streak too, so they probably, there was maybe a certain amount of something we, in the abstract kind of think is a good policy tool, so it's probably not gonna be as big a thing. It's easy for partisans to misread public opinion on things they care about, even though we're not the ones being protected in, or it's not our industries that are having the protectionism apply in that case. But yeah, also just the NDP, they didn't have any good answers for the questions, but even the stuff they tried to run on, I'm not sure anyone even noticed or cared. And more to the point, the NDP just reduced themselves to just such a non-entity by getting to the point where Canadians just kind of tuned them out. And I think a lot of that goes back to the problems with the supply and confidence agreement on it, and just the leadership and political failings of Jagmeet Singh on how he handled all of that.
Like there were
months go by where he would talk about how, they're holding the Liberals to account, they're getting stuff, they're, willing to blow up the supply and confidence agreement if they don't get what they want. And then when the deadline they set would approach, they would fold and sheepishly accept an extension. When they find that went on like time and time again, they would, in committees, back to the Liberals when they tried to scuttle various inquiries into the the Winnipeg lab and all of that. And when they finally got around to blowing it up, they blew up the supply and confidence agreement. The next question was, okay, will you still support the government? And they kind of, So nothing fundamentally changed after that. And, at some point, I think Canadians, even those who were predisposed to the NDP, realized they weren't actually going to deliver anything, at least not while they're in their current form.
I don't know if it was always his thought, but the line Singh trotted out kind of a few days before the election in an interview with the Toronto Star was, I've sacrificed the party essentially and my leadership to try to deliver on some gains for Canadians. A start of a pharmacare plan, a dental care plan that just got expanded today to seniors, to make sure there is some growth in the social safety net, some union rights and things like that. And, Althea Raj picked this up for Toronto Star, arguing in a column I thought was probably one of the hotter takes that we'll see if she's right. I don't think so, but she argued Singh may be better remembered than Jack Layton for his policy wins. Even if electorally it failed, he did accomplish something. We'll have to see on that. It's a bold take.
Yeah, I don't buy that. 3% of a national pharmacare plan is hardly the sort of thing that mates for a great eulogy.
But they do still have the balance of power with their their tiny caucus. And so getting pharmacare further might be one of the things they figure out. I mean, the first thing they're going to figure out is who runs the party, because we haven't even mentioned that Singh has resigned. He was the first leader to resign on election night. Jonathan Pettineau being the one who resigned, I think the next day or day after.
Yeah, for those who quite reasonably can't remember who that is, he's the also leader to Elizabeth May for the Green Party, who has been functionally a non-entity politically.
He tried to get in the debates, then they didn't run enough candidates because it wasn't fair.
Yeah, well, the debate commission messed up their handling of it, but keeping the Greens out, entirely fair on that one. But yeah, no, the Greens are now going back to just being the Elizabeth May party on there. So yeah, they're going to have to figure out what they want. Let's figure out who they want to be the interim leader, and maybe who's going to actually be the leader afterwards. Although who actually wants to step up and try to run that rump of a party that doesn't even have official party status? And on that note, looks like they're going to be trying to put a lot of their leverage into trying to get the rules changed to benefit them by lowering the official party status threshold.
Well, I don't know how much they're actually going to be putting into that. When Don Davies was asked about things, he said...
It's literally the only thing they've come out with so far that's approaching a demand for what they want to see in the new parliament. He
did correctly note official party status is arbitrary and everything's negotiable in politics.
Yeah, but at some point, it's arbitrary, but you do need a dividing line, and it does need to be set somewhere. And if you keep changing it whenever it becomes mildly inconvenient, then it's hardly worth the paper it's printed on, and kind of just makes the whole thing a bit of a joke.
I mean, that's how BC's official party status works in the legislature. It's just the 3 independents who left the Conservatives can't figure out how to do paperwork to get free money. Like, I get like the broader political value is not good for like the comms of it. It looks petty and like selfish, but it is a meaningful status in terms of getting questions in question period, representation on committee. It lets them actually do the job of parliamentarians rather than just being like effectively independent. So I get the value in trying to fight for it, at least asking for it, especially as they try to figure out, who should be our interim leader and what else should we do. On the leadership question, we know David Eby's not interested in the job. That's not surprising. I would be shocked if Wab Kinew was interested in it either, even though people keep saying he should run. I like him, but I just don't think premiers should become federal party leaders because they historically don't win when they do.
Yeah, only been one that's ever successfully made the jump from...
and it was 150 years ago.
Yeah, to PM at least. There's been a couple that eventually go on to be party leaders, but don't
Tommy
win.
Douglas was pretty good at it, but...
Stanfeld too.
Yeah.
So actually, yeah, Bob Ray, interim
He was
leader.
interim, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's not many. So stick where your power is strongest, especially since Eby and Kinew are both in their first elected term.
Yeah, you can actually do something rather than just sit as a glorified independent.
The names I've seen floated for the Fed NDP right now or among the caucus, Heather McPherson and Alexandra Boulerice as probably the 2 front runners. A lot of people like McPherson. She's been their foreign policy critic for the last bit. Alexandra Boulerice has a pretty strong base in Quebec and is obviously probably the most bilingual of the leaders or of the candidates in that caucus. People will also talk about Rachel Notley. She did give a speech introducing Jagmeet Singh just before the election when he toured Edmonton. That was far friendlier than anything she's ever said about him before. So,
being out of politics and not having the weight of the federal NDP dragging you down in Alberta probably has a tendency to make one a little nicer.
Yeah, I don't think it should be Jenny Kwan, who, when asked on, I think it was CTV, would you cross the floor to join the Liberals? She said, well, that's an interesting question, and then went off about how she's here just to, make things work for people. And so naturally, someone tweeted, Jenny Kwan does not rule out joining the Liberals, to which she replied vaguely at first, and then deleted that tweet to then say, I am a New Democrat and I will stay a New Democrat. Which makes sense because she's the most partisan member of that caucus. And has been since she was like a BC NDP cabinet member in the 90s. She's not leaving. I don't understand why she's been in politics for so long, but can't answer one question. Anyway, so the NDP will be looking for a new leader. It's unclear what the Greens are going to do. Elizabeth May is clearly still sticking around. She was asked about crossing the floor, and she was like, well, I'm open to joining Carney's cabinet, but I think she still wants to be a Green. She also said she might leave her name in for House Speaker again. This is all stuff that I remember when, in 2008, or when some of the first times she was elected, she was talked about as joining Stéphane Dion's cabinet or something. We're like, yeah. Anyway, what's old is new again. Elizabeth May, never change. I don't know if they'll run a leadership race or not to fill their co-seat, or if they'll run for...
Well, if I remember, they never really formalized the whole co-leader thing. They were bad about updating like the party constitution bylaws and some of that stuff. Yeah, they had trouble
with it too.
Yeah, so...
Pednault was the technical leader on Elections Canada forms. So they'll have to at least update those to say Elizabeth May, unless she doesn't want the job by herself.
I'm going to guess it's going to follow path of least resistance, and they're not going to appoint another person.
That's enough time on those parties. We don't have anything to say about the Bloc, do we? They lost seats, but I don't know. Blanchet seems like he's sticking around.
Yeah, nothing to add on the Bloc.
The Conservative infighting continues on their part. Doesn't seem like the knives are fully out inside the Conservative caucus. I've seen Chris d'Entremont, I think, MP, giving like the least supportive comments of Poilievre, but even he's not like saying he needs to leave. It's more just like, well, I'm disappointed, which is fair.
Yeah, at this moment, the strongest criticism does seem to be coming from the provincial counterparts.
The Ontario and Nova Scotia ones. The Alberta and Saskatchewan ones are pretty quiet.
Yeah, although the maritime ones, in keeping with the, culture out there, is very politely phrased in it. There's no sharp elbows the way there are with the Ontario ones, but Tim Houston definitely had this could it on better. We've shown you can win by being, a little nicer and all that. So, also he's apparently started learning French. So, read into that what you will, as well as put out a kind of introductory, I'm proud to be a Nova Scotian and Canadian video, like a week
which he did before the election.
Yeah, a week before the polls. So, yeah, interesting there.
Meanwhile, Jamil Javani, right after being elected, posts a meme of like Hulk Hogan ripping off his shirt, but it's Doug Ford, and the undershirt says liberal, because apparently criticizing the Fed Conservatives makes you a liberal.
And this is also after on election night, he just went off on Doug Ford on CBC.
So nice that one of J.D. Vance's best friends is an MP. He was elected before this in a by-election, but...
In Aaron O'Toole's old seat, too.
Yeah. A lot of strategists are fighting on Twitter openly. Pierre Poilievre is trying to do the work to keep his job. He said on election night he's sticking around, and apparently has been making the standard calls that you should be doing if you want to keep your job, which is like what Tom Mulcair didn't do after 2015.
Yeah, but by all indications, the caucus is still pretty united. And yeah, it fell short of where they were hoping to be and where they looked like they were going to be 6 months ago. But, the ground did change pretty significantly, and they still posted some significant gains, solid increase in both their caucus and one of the best popular vote results in recent history. There's a lot to recommend carrying on this. Like, there were definitely some mistakes on that campaign, but they also, for the most part, ran like a pretty tight operation on it. And like the main mistake was not pivoting early enough. There's a decent chance that this election had gone on one more week that they might have been able to finish closing the gap on the polls and come out ahead. But that also means, if they did start the pivot a week earlier, they might have been able to do better as well. But there's a solid case that, they've built a foundation from here. They posted good results. They drew the coalition in a significant way, and particularly in a minority government that is unstable. It makes a lot of sense to not go through a lengthy and divisive leadership race and instead work on patching the problems with this, there probably does need to be a senior staff person, i.e. Jenny Byrne, who was running the operation, be let go and someone else brought in. But, it made sense to keep the leader just with where everything is for the most part here. I think decent chance Erin O'Toole would have won. I would have liked it, a conservative more in that mold to be leading the party, but, I don't think there's an easy way to swap that out or get there. And in terms of what's going to work best for the Conservatives, honestly, they're probably better off staying the course and making the changes they need than trying to upend the whole thing with yet another one-and-done leadership.
Provided Poilievre can win a seat. If he runs in a by-election and loses...
Oh, he's done at that point.
I don't see how you can come back and just be like, oops, I just suck at campaigning personally twice. But I think more fundamentally, the Conservatives and the Liberals are at risk of this, is both of them looking at this result and only seeing the good and not learning from the bad. Like, for the Liberals' part, they did really well, but a lot of that was luck. And just all of the winds blew right for them. And I think Carney's campaign was actually pretty weak and was stalling and starting to struggle.
Yeah, particularly the last 2 weeks, really from the debates. Actually, even in the lead up,
they just kind of stopped.
Yeah, when they enter the last stretch of debate prep, and did the thing that a lot of campaigns do, the day leading up to it, kind of go silent and focus on getting the debate ready. He did fine in the debates, but they never really regained momentum. The platform cost them more than it helped them on it, and it was actually, for a strong start, had a pretty weak end, and they ended up basically coasting on what they banked at the start. But that had gone on much longer. They could have lost that.
And Carney's new at electoral politics, so he did well for that, obviously, right? Any win is a win. And presumably his next campaign will be stronger after he's had 2, 3, 4 years in government, both in the House of Commons. Obviously, he won his seat, which, ironically, I didn't realize until yesterday, was the seat literally next door to Carleton. And if Poilievre had won, they would have been neighbors. But now Poilievre has to move both ridings and possibly out of Stornoway, but we don't need to rehash that. So Carney's got a lot to learn about campaigning and leading and being prime minister. And hopefully the Liberals also recognize it may be the case that all those NDP voters that joined them aren't going to stick around. Maybe they how are they going to work to keep that coalition? Because they've effectively turned Canada into a two-party state, which it hasn't been for a long time. And they are at the same risk of looking at all the good things that happened and just going, well, we just got to do that again and we'll win. Just tell people Per Poilievre is scary, because he is, and that'll work. Yeah,
in fact, I think the Liberals coalition they've assembled is a lot more fragile than the Conservative one. It's less visible, the cracks that are there, but...
Yeah, I mean, people aren't yelling at each other on
people
Twitter.
Aren't yelling at each other, because, victory does tend to paper over these things. But, there were a lot of people that kind of picked up and moved over to the Liberals with both a new leader and the whole global situation going on. And that's not likely to stay there. This is still a government that has been around a long time, that is exhausted. A lot of the Carney people were also the Trudeau people. We'll see when the cabinet and all that gets unveiled, but there's a real chance that the accumulated governmentitis is going to put a real drag on the party, and this could be the last gasp more than the start of the next 10 years for the Liberals.
The one thing I'm optimistic about for them is they are not making the David Eby mistake, and they are actually going to be announcing their cabinets supposedly in the next week or so. And we're calling Parliament early. They're going to bring forward a budget before July 1st. And they're going to promise to cut taxes, open U.S. trade talks, and open up have a free trade across Canada bill to do as much as they can legislatively as fast as they can.
Yeah, which would be a welcome change from the Trudeau government that was terrible at getting anything done. And, if you want to actually prove your change, you need to start being able to do stuff. And, hopefully Mark Carney does that. But, there's probably a lot of stuff that has to be torn out root and branch and rebuilt in order to get that to work, because it sure seemed like the last 10 years of Liberal government, and particularly after the 2019 election onward, they would announce stuff and then it just wouldn't happen. So, great for Carney to seem to be hitting the ground running on this, getting the budget out, start doing stuff. But, if it's the same deliverology of the last 6 years, they're gonna be in real trouble, and that honeymoon's gonna be real short.
Anything else on the election before we talk just briefly about Elections Canada itself?
Yeah, you mentioned this briefly on the NDP kind of on the balance of power, and that is also one of the other things I'm a little concerned about. Like, on one hand, I do think the Liberals need some political accountability and a disapproval to be felt at the ballot box for all the problems of the last 10 years. On the other hand, this is one of those times where you really want everything to be moving with the confidence and focus that a majority government has. And my worry is that, kind of just like you said, they're going to get caught up in stuff like farmer care and all that when they really need to be having almost like single focus on strengthening the country, shoring up its economy and its ability to project sovereignty and strength. And this really is not the time to be getting distracted with big expansions of new social programs. It's the time to be all about the things you need to keep Canada strong and free. And my worry is that by needing the NDP votes, they are going to get pulled off of what they should be focusing on by focusing on the NDP's priorities instead of the country's.
I think to properly defend Canada, we need a stronger Canada, which is like the Liberal brand, but does involve stronger social programs, and not talking about that, just pretending it's like free trade is going to magically protect us isn't enough. So like
we're going to be better protected by having a stronger economy than we are by having more farmer care.
You need to have stronger people, right? And having people feel less economically precarious by having their bills covered, by having them, like if you took away their health care, and you can remind them that America doesn't have that.
It also helps economic precarity, a strong and rapidly growing economy.
Yeah, do it both. They have the plans for the free trade agreement, but we can also fix EI so people aren't struggling on that end. Like, we got a lot to do, and they need to do it all.
But you also need to be focused and dedicated on the things that have the highest leverage and the highest returns on that. And there are going to be trade-offs on what the government can be focused on. You can only do so many things at once.
Tell that to Dave Barrett. On the Elections Canada front, one thing to keep an eye on is ballot boxes closing early in northern Quebec, in Nunavik. Some troubling stories, which I know a bunch of civil libertarian groups and pretty much everyone is condemning. Like, no one is defending this. But Elections Canada is saying the weather was bad and they had trouble finding local staff.
Really? The weather is bad around the Arctic in April?
I'm not defending them. I'm saying what they're saying, Scott.
Yeah. This is more my shock that they, have not planned for how to conduct an election in harsh northern weather. I mean, in 2006, we were voting in January. Surely we can manage to do an April election. And if there is some real concern over it, you have stuff like special ballots and whatnot. If you don't think you can actually service the full riding, send everyone a mail-in, or send that riding mail-in ballots and let them vote that way, rather than this mess here where polling stations were either only open for a couple hours or didn't open at all.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate for those who were disenfranchised. I think we'll have to end it there. There was a few stories in BC this week as the legislature returned. 2 bills came forward. The province is looking at a review of the Mental Health Act. And the mining minister wished his chief of staff a 50th birthday. So happy 50th birthday, Patrick.
Yeah, friend of the pod who, for those who don't know, turned 40 today. So that's now permanently etched into Hansard.
Unless he gets held in contempt of Parliament for misleading the House, which would be very funny. And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicoast. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicoast is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.